There was a man who had stopped by the store on his way home from work to pick up a few items for his wife. He was, of course, wandering around sort of aimlessly, trying to get the various items that his wife had asked for. And as it was, he happened to pass, of course, several people along the way, but there was one in particular that really caught his attention. There was a young father with a 3-year-old boy, his son, and they were kind of meeting each other on various aisles and so forth. And this 3-year-old was really being uncooperative to the dad. And the first time that this man passed the father and the son, the 3-year-old was walking and asking over and over for a candy bar. And while the man didn't hear the entire conversation, he heard his dad say, "Now, Billy, this won't take long." So they passed on to the next aisle, and then the 3-year-old's pleas increased greatly, louder and louder. And now his dad was saying very quietly, "Billy, just calm down. We will be done in a minute." And when they passed the dairy case, the kid was now screaming uncontrollably, and Dad was still keeping his cool. And the man was very impressed. And in a very low voice, he said, "Billy, settle down. We're almost out of here." Well, the dad and the son reached the checkout ahead of this man who'd come in for his wife. And the boy still gave no evidence of calming down, and the dad gave no evidence of losing control. The boy was now screaming and kicking and yelling, and it was just awful. And Dad was very calm, saying over and over again, "Billy, we will be in the car in just a minute, and then everything will be okay." Well, this man was really impressed with this father and his patience beyond words. And after paying for his groceries, he hurried to catch up so he could compliment this amazing example of patience and self-control. And he got there just in time, and the father said, "Billy, we're done. It's going to be okay." And he tapped the father on the shoulder and said, "Sir, I couldn't help but watch how well you handled little Billy. You are amazing." And the dad looked at him and says, "You don't get it, do you? I'm Billy." Our sermon series today is on the word patience. Ephesians chapter 3 in verse 2, Ephesians chapter 4 verse 2, "with all humility and gentleness with patience." Now the King James says long suffering, and that's probably a better word. And as I'll point out in just a minute, there are actually two words that often get translated patience from the Greek into our English. But I'm working on the theme of how to walk in a manner worthy of our calling, which Paul says in verse 1 we're supposed to do. Now, we don't do this to be saved. We do it because we're saved. We do it because God has blessed us. And now that we are in his kingdom, we are in his family, we are pardoned, and he has given us this great gift of mercy, then we respond by walking in a manner worthy of our calling. And our calling is found back in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 10, at least from my vantage point. I'm sure that you could look at other perspectives on our calling, but Paul says in verse 10 of chapter 3, "so that the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known through the church to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places." I believe it is our calling as the church to make known the manifold wisdom of God. And we're looking at qualities that Paul suggests here in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 3, that enable us to walk in a manner worthy of our calling. This is number 3. We've looked at humility and meekness, and now we're going to look at patience. The word basically means to be long-tempered or slow to boil, and which, of course, as opposed to short-tempered. There is more. It's more to do with people than with circumstances. In other words, sometimes things happen to us, and yeah, we handle them or don't handle them. But this is more the idea of handling people. And of course, if you get our bulletin, you'll notice I titled this "Long Suffering with Insufferable People." We're all insufferable. We all are. We all have things that annoy other people or frustrate or irritate other people. And so when you're in a church of more than 20 people, you're going to find somebody in there that just is insufferable. And so we have to learn to be long-suffering. Some of course, have focused upon the idea of it takes a long time to boil as sort of the meaning of the word. And when you stop and think about it, what causes water to boil? Well, the intensity of the flame. And so sometimes things happen that just flare up and make us really want to boil. But we are the ones, though, who decide whether or not that flame is going to reach us and cause us to boil. We have choice in the matter. Now, as I said, there's another word that's often translated as patience. And the other one is the idea of bearing up under. And it's that a weight has been placed on you and you don't run away, but you hold on to it. Maybe it's related more to circumstances than to people, but people could be involved. But when we're looking at it, more focused upon the idea of self-restraint. In English, when we think about the word patience, it means the bearing of provocation, annoyance, misfortune, or pain without complaint, loss of temper, irritation, the ability or willingness to suppress restlessness or annoyance when confronted with delay, to have patience with a slow learner, quiet, steady perseverance, even-tempered care. And so you see, the idea here is that not just that things happen, but people happen. There was a man I read this week who said he was at a traffic light, and while he was waiting there, his mind began to think about a couple of things. But he was looking at the traffic light, and as soon as it turned to green, he had just gotten onto a thought, and it wasn't more than a second or two, and somebody's honking the horn back behind him. And so there's the idea that somebody is quick to boil. I mean, they've got to get going. They've got to get running. I've noticed that I walk early in the mornings. I get up and do a couple of things, put the coffee on, and then I go out and walk. And there's one guy, I live in a residential area, it's 25 miles an hour. And I'll bet you this guy is going 35 and more. Now, there's still traffic. I mean, there's, other than, and I'm the only one around, but this guy's in a hurry. Maybe he's late. I don't know. Maybe he just likes to drive, but he responds. And, people like that, they get to a boil quickly. They do. And they can blow up all over you. And you can allow them to get under your skin, or you can do something about it. Now, long-suffering works, first of all, passively. It means holding your peace, your tongue, not saying anything, not doing anything, just standing there. And knowing that you could say something, knowing that you could do something, but instead, you just stand there passively. Or it could be active. You could do something for them in return. Too often when somebody irritates us, we've got to work on ourselves in keeping our boil point down, our temper down, our anger down. But instead, we could turn it around and do something positive for them. And I'll bring that up again in just a minute. But why not, instead of just standing there taking it, why not do something actively positive for them? Why not help them? Why not turn it around? But when we read the word, and it's kind of interesting, Paul seems to like to use this word a lot as he writes to churches, that we need to be long-suffering. Paul, in other places, says, we shouldn't use harsh words. And sometimes when people annoy us, it's easy to say something harsh and not realize we shouldn't have. There's a little meme on Facebook I've seen. Some things are better left unspoken. And I realize that 30 minutes after I speak them. How often have you, in anger, in annoyance, in irritation, said something off the cuff to somebody only to want to get your words back in as soon as you've said them? And you see, that's what long-suffering is all about, is not saying those words. It's also not taking action or taking revenge, Paul calls it not returning evil for evil. In other words, they do something bad to you, don't do something bad back to them. Oftentimes, though, we, as Americans in particular, we think that, it's okay to return, if they do something to me, I do it back to you. If you harm me illegally, I'm going to harm you back legally. That's not even right. But don't let your emotions get such to where you want to lash out, in terms of, of your own fists. When I was a teenager in high school, back in high school, one night, Mom and Dad informed me I was watching my brothers and sisters instead of being able to go out. I was really mad about that. I mean, here's a 14, 15-year-old's got to watch his younger sisters and brother. And during the night, inevitably, they made me mad. Well, I got mad at something that they did. And I got so mad, I had to hit something. And I did. I hit the piano. And I broke 2 of the black keys. And then I had to explain to Mom and Dad what happened when they got home. Now, I could have blamed my brother and sisters because they got me mad, but the fact of the matter is I chose to do that. You see, this kind of patience, long-suffering, means I don't do that. You don't take revenge. You don't lash out. You don't say harsh words. And the way you do that is you remember who's in charge. God's in charge. Now, it's easy to say yes, but in the heat of the moment, you need to remind yourself, hey, I'm not in charge. I'm not the one who's going to have to deal with this. And also, you need to remind yourself that God will one day make all things right. Sometimes we lash out in a sense of wanting to make things right here and now. But we're imperfect. We don't always know what that's like, and we don't always know how to do that right. And so when we try to make things right here, as imperfect people, sometimes we really mess them up. But we need to remember that God will one day settle all accounts. There's a story that somebody told of a farmer who had a strong disdain for all things religious. And it's not just, and this isn't just farmers, but it fit the circumstances of the story. He plowed his field as he plowed his field every Sunday morning. He would shake his fist at the church people who passed by on their way to worship him. And he could tell because they were dressed nice. Well, one year this October came and the farmer had his finest crop ever. I mean, it was good. It was the best in the entire county, and he was so proud of himself. And after the harvest was complete, he placed an advertisement in the local paper, which in order to belittle Christians for their faith in God. Near the end of the diatribe in his advertisement, he wrote, "Faith in God must not mean much if someone like me can prosper." In other words, he's saying here, I don't go to church on Sundays, and yet here I am in the middle of October in harvest, and I'm doing good. So there's no God because he didn't do anything to me. Well, the response from the Christians, of course, was quiet and polite. But in the next edition of the town paper, a small ad appeared. It read simply, "God doesn't settle his accounts in October. He will settle them one day, though, for all of us on that final day." And if I remember that, then that helps me to be long-suffering, because I don't have to fix things here and now. I don't have to fix whatever is wrong, whether with brothers and sisters or with outsiders. I can be patient. Now, we can help ourselves with various and sundry things we might come up with. There's the old count to 10. We could walk away. We could go seek some help from a brother or sister or advice on how to be more patient. Of course, we can pray, and we should, about every situation that comes up. Even though this isn't about being long-suffering or patient, a preacher friend of mine was talking about Nehemiah and how Nehemiah was talking with the king. And the king said, "What do you want me to do?" And instead of that moment that Nehemiah prayed for favor with the king and then asked, in the heat of the moment, whether it's, wanting to know what to ask as a favor or wanting to know what to do in order to respond, we can pray. I mean, prayer can come fast and quick. And so we can do some things in order to counter that. But you see, that's the thing, is that we should think about what we ought to do, especially if we find ourselves flying off the handle. Well, we can also help others as well. I said otherwise, do something positive. Jim McGuigan used to tell the story about a soldier who was quite faithful and quite religious, and every night before they got into bed to go to sleep, he was on his knees praying, and he was always positive about everything. He prayed before his food, he prayed for this, he said what a great day this was, and everybody hated him because of that. He was like a Pollyanna in the way that he looked at things. And one day they went on this 10-mile hike, and it was brutal. Not only was it long and arduous, up and down hills, but it was raining. And when they got back, everybody was covered with mud. And the sergeant told everybody just to go, not to worry about getting cleaned up, just to go to bed. And yet here was this soldier on his knees praying while everybody else was trying to jump into bed and go to sleep. And the sergeant was so mad at him that he threw his muddy, dirty boots at him and actually hit him. And the soldier didn't move, he just kept on praying. And the sergeant yelled some obscenities and then went to sleep. The next morning, the sergeant found his boots, right next to the bed, the way they're supposed to be, perfectly polished and clean. And that's what the praying soldier had done. You see, sometimes that's what we need to do in order to help others, is to do something positive for them. Take our anger and turn it into something positive. Somebody else I was reading this week told of another father, walking through a mall with his 2-year-old son. The child was cranky. For those of you who've raised kids, you know what the terrible twos are like. He kept whining and wiggling and complaining, and the father struggled to be patient with him. And all of a sudden, he scooped his little 2-year-old grumbler up in his arms, held him very tight to his chest, and began to sing an impromptu love song. None of the words rhymed. He sang it off key, but as best he could, he shared his heart. I love you. I'm so glad you're my boy. You make me laugh. From store to store, the father kept going. Words not rhyming, notes off key. The son relaxed, captivated by this strange and wonderful song. Finally, when they had finished, the dad went to the car, buckled his son in to the car seat, and the son raised his arms, lifted up his head, and said, "Sing it to me again, Daddy. Sing it to me again." If we act like that towards cranky, annoying, irritating people, they will react the same way. They're no different than 2-year-old boys and 2-year-old girls. They will respond in a positive way and will not believe the way in which we responded to them. Why do we need to walk worthily? Well, we work with outsiders a lot. And some of them are going to be insufferable. Some of them are going to be annoying, irritating, frustrating, disappointing, discouraging. And if we as Christians respond in a harsh manner, if we respond by flying off the handle, that's not good. I remember the guy that I rented a room from when I was in San Diego. I had only been a Christian for just a short while. But every time I did something wrong, he said, "Hey, Mr. Christian, I didn't know you were allowed to do that." He would try to rub my face in it. Now, when we're young in the faith, we're obviously going to make mistakes. But as we grow, we need to make sure that we learn how to walk in a manner worthy of our calling. If we are out proclaiming the manifold wisdom of God to people, we need to be patient, long-suffering. There was a traditional Hebrew story. Abraham was sitting in his tent one evening. This is obviously not in the Bible. When he saw an old man weary from age. That's kind of interesting because when we first see Abraham, he's 75 years old. Anyway, weary from age and journey, coming toward him, Abraham rushed out, greeted him, and invited him into his tent. There he washed the old man's feet and gave him food and drink. The old man immediately began eating without saying any prayer or blessing. So Abraham asked him, "Don't you worship God?" The old traveler replied, "I worship fire only and reverence no other God." When he heard this, Abraham became incensed, grabbed the old man by the shoulders, and threw him out of the tent. When the old man had departed, God called to his friend Abraham and asked where the stranger was. Abraham said, "I forced him out because he did not worship you." And God answered, "I have suffered him these 80 years, though he dishonors me. Could you not endure him one night?" I love that story because it's true about me. There are people all over this world that God has put up with for years. I meet them once and can't put up with them. God says, "Bob, can't you put up with them for a short period of time?" But we work with all kinds of outsiders, people who don't worship God, people who will irritate us, annoy us, frustrate us, who will insult us. And how do we respond? How we respond determines whether or not we're going to be able to share with them the good news of Jesus Christ, the manifold wisdom of God. But also, we need to have long suffering with one another. You see, those on the outside, they're also watching us and how we treat each other too. If they find out that we treat each other with disrespect, if we talk harsh to each other, if we fly off the handle at each other, they're not going to want to be a part of us. And how are they going to listen to us if we don't treat each other that way? So when they see our patience with each other, it will adorn our life and our teaching for them. This week, I want you to take notice of everyone and every situation that ruffles your feathers. I want you to think about how you normally respond to that. Do you growl? Do you fly off the handle? Do you say something harsh? Pick just one, pray about it, and come up with a better solution or a better plan that will edify them, create a better relationship, and demonstrate long suffering. If we are to walk worthy of our calling, we must exhibit long suffering to each other in the church, since we are working together, and to those outside the church to whom we want to proclaim the manifold wisdom of God. Our God will be pleased when you respond with long suffering to every person, because then we are imitating him. God bless.